I'll never forget the moment the entire Thanksgiving table went silent, so quiet I could hear the furnace humming down the hallway. My dad's face, usually red from beer, and loud stories drained to the color of printer paper. His veteran buddies, men who had survived deployments, bar fights, and enough hard years to fill a dozen memoirs, suddenly stiffened like they were back on active duty. And all because a retired Navy SEAL squinted at the small badge clipped to my lanyard and asked, "Wait, your daughter is Olivia Watson." That was the moment everything changed. The moment the man who mocked me as just a Walmart cashier finally discovered who I really was, and what I'd spent most of my adult life hiding. But before I tell you what the SEAL said next, I need you to understand how we got there. Because moments like that don't happen in a vacuum. They grow from years of pain, silence, and choices that seem small until they aren't. So let me take you back to earlier that day, Thanksgiving morning, when I still believed I had a chance to fix things with my father. Thanksgiving has always been complicated for my family. Some families gather around the table like it's sacred. Some treat it like a noisy, messy reunion. And then there were the Watsons, a collection of strained smiles, uneven expectations, and the kind of emotional distance that could stretch across the entire Midwest. Still, I tried. I woke up early that morning in my tiny two-bedroom apartment, surrounded by the soft hum of my old refrigerator and the smell of fresh coffee. My place wasn't much just something I could afford without drawing attention, but it was mine, and it was quiet, and it didn't judge me. I stood in front of my closet debating what to wear, settling on something modest: dark jeans, a burgundy sweater, and a simple coat warm enough for the Michigan cold. I glanced at my lanyard out of habit. The badge was small, unmarked, except for a coded identifier that didn't mean anything to ordinary people. It hung on my neck the same way someone else might wear a St. Christopher medal, more for protection than display. I tucked it under my sweater. Dad didn't know about it. Dad didn't know about a lot of things. I drove to his house, rehearsing how I'd greet him, how I'd try again to bridge the distance he always seemed determined to widen. The roads were quiet except for families heading to gatherings, kids pressed against backseat windows, cousins laughing in driveways. The kind of normal American Thanksgiving I used to dream about. Dad's place looked the same as always, weathered siding a flagpole out front, and the unmistakable sound of men laughing inside. His veteran buddies were already there. They came every year, guys he'd met at the VFW, men he reminisced with over cheap beer and old war stories. I took a deep breath and knocked. Dad opened the door with a grin that faded slightly when he saw it was me. He stepped aside, letting me in with a muttered, "'Bout time." The warmth inside hit me first, heat from the oven smells of roasted turkey and canned cranberry sauce. Then came the voices. A chorus of middle-aged and older men filled the living room, leaning back in recliners, boots propped up, talking about deployments and grandkids and the price of gas. Dad's voice boomed behind me. "Everyone, this is my daughter, Olivia, the Walmart cashier." The room chuckled. Just like that, my stomach dropped. I tried to laugh it off. "Hi, everyone." One of the men raised his beer. "Hey there. Sir Frank says you're the one keeping Walmart running." More laughter. Dad clapped me on the back like I was part of the joke. I forced a smile, though it tightened my cheeks. "Dad," I murmured, "could you not introduce me like that?" What he said, shrugging, "It's the truth." I didn't argue. Arguing never helped. Instead, I carried a bowl of mashed potatoes to the table and focused on breathing. We all sat, and the usual Thanksgiving routine began: grace passing plates, comments about football and politics. For a while it was almost bearable, but Dad couldn't help himself. "So Liv," he said loudly, "how's the glamorous life of barely paying your rent Walmart cashiering?" The table snickered again. My face grew warm. "It's fine, Dad." "You know," he continued, taking a slow drink of beer, "I just wish you'd done something with your life. Something real. Not ringing up groceries and living in that shoebox apartment." Someone chuckled. "Come on, Frank, don't be too hard on her." Dad shook his head. "I'm just being honest." There it was, the phrase he always used when he decided honesty mattered more than kindness. I pushed my fork down gently. "Dad, please, not today." "Oh, don't get sensitive," he muttered. "It's Thanksgiving. We're supposed to laugh." But it wasn't laughter. It was humiliation, slow, sharp, familiar. I excused myself, stepping out onto the porch. The cold bit my skin, but it was better than the heat of embarrassment inside. I rubbed my arms, trying to collect myself, telling myself to last a little longer. For him, for peace. When I went back in, Dad looked annoyed. "You done sulking, you're throwing off the mood." Something inside me cracked, but quietly like thin ice under a small weight. "I think I should go," I said softly. Dad shrugged. "Fine, if you're gonna ruin the holiday, better to leave." And so I did. I walked out of the warm house into the crisp, cold air coat wrapped tight around me, my small badge slipping out from under my sweater as I shut the door. And that was when the retired Navy SEAL Jack Larson stood up, his eyes narrowing as he stared at it. "Wait," he said, voice suddenly sober and sharp. "Your daughter is Olivia Watson." Everything that happened next, well, that was the beginning of Dad's face losing every last bit of color. When Jack Larson, retired Navy SEAL, the kind of man who spoke little but saw everything, rose halfway out of his chair to stare out the window after me, nobody knew what to make of it. Not yet. His sudden stillness was out of place among the easy laughter and clinking silverware. But the truth is, the tension had been building long before he noticed my badge. It had been building for years. To understand why that moment hit my father so hard, you need to understand what happened inside that house before Jack stood up, and what had already happened between my father and me long before Thanksgiving Day. When I walked back inside after stepping onto the porch, the warmth of the house hit me again. The smell of turkey, the buttery rolls cooling on the counter, the faint aroma of cigarette smoke clinging to my dad's jacket, even though he hadn't smoked in years. The men were still talking about the army deployments in Germany, who had bad knees, who'd had what surgery. It was the kind of conversation that usually comforted my dad, made him feel young again, important, like he still had a place in the world. But then there was me, his awkward reminder that not all legacies turn out how you imagine when you're 22 and full of fire. I eased back into my seat, hoping we could just eat in peace, but Dad's eyes flicked toward me with annoyance. "You good now," he muttered. "Done with your little time out." There was a scattered chuckle from the men, the kind people give when they don't want to take sides, but don't want to seem rude either. "Yeah, Dad," I whispered, "I'm fine." He stabbed at his turkey with too much force. Always so sensitive. I swear, this generation. Frank, one of his buddies, interrupted. "She just needed some air." Dad waved him off. "Nah, Jack here knows what I mean. Don't you Jack kids these days fold like lawn chairs?" Jack didn't answer. He just chewed quietly, eyes drifting again toward the window, though no one noticed. Dad leaned back and reached for another beer. "Anyway, I was just telling them how you're still working at Walmart. What is it, 10 years now?" 7. I kept my voice calm. "Oh, 7, he repeated mockingly. "That's much better." I felt the sting travel up my spine. The words weren't new, but the audience was. That made it worse somehow. I didn't care if he was disappointed in me, that was old news. But broadcasting it to strangers, that burned. One of the men cleared his throat. "Nothing wrong with honest work. Cashiers keep the world running." Dad barked out a laugh. Sure. But she barely pays rent. Lives in that tiny place downtown. You ever seen it? You'd think she was fresh out of high school." I swallowed hard. "Dad, can we not do this?" He smirked. "Why, you embarrassed? Maybe embarrassment will motivate you." I set my fork down. "I'm not embarrassed. I just want to have a peaceful Thanksgiving." Dad scoffed. "You and your peace. Life's not peaceful, Olivia. It's hard. And you're not even trying." That one landed. Not because it was true, because it was everything he'd believed about me since I was 12. When I didn't want to join ROTC. When I preferred books to sports. When I refused to be the version of strength he understood. Another man spoke softly. "Frank, come on. It's Thanksgiving. Ease up." But my dad was a runaway train. Once he felt righteous, nothing could slow him down. He jabbed a thumb toward me. "You know what she told me last month? She said she's happy. Happy working part-time at Walmart and living in a shoebox. That's not happiness, that's giving up." I tried to breathe evenly. Happiness looks different to everyone. "Not real happiness," he shot back. "Real happiness comes from purpose." "And you think I don't have any?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. Dad shrugged. "If you do, I sure don't see it." Silence spread over the table like spilled milk. Embarrassing, irreversible. I pushed my chair back carefully, not wanting it to scrape loudly. "I'm going home." Dad threw his napkin down. "Don't be dramatic, Olivia." "I'm not. I just don't want to ruin your holiday." "You already did," he muttered. That was when one of the men, Tom, I think, said quietly, "Frank, stop." Dad stood up as if to reclaim the room. "No, she needs to hear it. She needs to learn." I raised her to be strong, not soft. I stared at him. Mocking me doesn't make me stronger. "Oh, so now I'm the villain," he snapped. "No," I said. "You're my dad, that's why it hurts." That sentence seemed to land somewhere deeper than the others. His eyes flickered uncertain for just a breath, but pride won quickly like it always did. "Go on then," he said, waving me off. "If you can't handle a little truth, you can leave." So I did. I walked toward the door, heart-pounding, cheeks burning. I wasn't angry, not really. Mostly I was tired of chasing approval, tired of shrinking myself so he wouldn't feel disappointed. My coat brushed my lanyard as I slipped it on. The badge swung free for a moment, catching the light from the window. I didn't even notice. I was too focused on breathing steadily so I wouldn't cry until I reached my car. But Jack Larson noticed. He saw everything. And as the door closed behind me, Jack stood slowly, stiffly, every joint protesting age and old injuries, and stared after me with an expression I couldn't see. Dad sat back down triumphantly, as if winning an argument against your own child was something worth celebrating. One of the veterans looked uncomfortable. "Frank, you sure you handled that right?" Dad scoffed. "Handled what? She'll be fine. She's always fine." But Jack wasn't listening to him. Jack was staring at the door, at the fading swing of the lanyard in my hand, at the tiny badge he recognized from a world my father knew nothing about. A world I had spent a decade working inside, quietly, invisibly, purposefully. Jack reached for his glasses, put them on, and leaned forward. "Frank," he said slowly, "your daughter, did she say her name was Olivia Watson?" And that was the first small crack in my father's confidence long before the truth shattered it completely. If someone had dropped a fork, it would have sounded like a gunshot in that silent dining room. My dad froze, mid-sip, his beer bottle hovering just below his chin, as the words Olivia Watson floated in the air like something dangerous. Nobody moved, not even the men who never stopped fidgeting with their sleeves or adjusting their caps. Even the football game on the muted TV felt like it paused out of respect. My dad squinted at Jack. "Yeah, Olivia, why?" Jack didn't answer right away. He adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and exhaled slowly, an old warrior's breath, heavy with memory. His hands, worn but steady, folded on the table as he stared at the door I'd walked through minutes earlier. "Frank," Jack said, "where did she get that badge?" Dad frowned. "What badge?" "The one on her lanyard," Jack replied. "She had it tucked under her sweater until she grabbed her coat. I saw it when it swung out." Dad waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that probably some employee badge or something. Walmart gives them those little things." Jack shook his head immediately. That wasn't a Walmart badge. The room shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Every man there had served long enough to recognize a change in tone. Even the ones who had no idea what Jack was talking about suddenly straightened just an inch. Something serious was happening. Dad's eyebrows knitted together. "What are you getting at?" Jack's eyes softened, not with pity, but with something like disbelief. "Frank, I haven't seen a badge like that in years. Not in civilian life." Tom leaned in. "What kind of badge was it?" Jack took a slow sip of water, gathering his words with precision, the way men trained for covert missions tended to do. "There are units," he said, "inside the Department of Defense units most soldiers never hear about. They rely on assets whose names aren't public, whose work isn't documented, and whose identities stay buried even during retirement." Dad let out a short laugh. "You think my Olivia, my cashier daughter, is part of some secret government group? Come on, Jack." But Jack didn't laugh. He leaned forward again, elbows on the table, his eyes reflecting something dark and old. "Before I retired," he said, "I sat in on briefings about support personnel, civilians, who managed logistics, intelligence transfers, and secure communications. People whose work saved lives but could never be acknowledged publicly." Dad blinked. "So what does that have to do with her?" Jack looked directly at him. One of them had the identifier OW. The room went silent again. Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He shook his head. "That doesn't mean anything. Could be anyone." "Could be," Jack agreed. But the badge I saw, it was a Tier 2 secure operations tag. I haven't seen one since I was active. They don't just hand those out, Frank, not to clerks, not to admin workers, and definitely not to Walmart employees. A murmur rippled around the table. Dad swallowed. There must be some mistake. Jack pressed his lips together. Let me ask you something, Frank. Do you actually know what your daughter really does? Dad bristled. Of course I do. She works at Walmart, part-time. And the rest of the time, Jack asked calmly. Dad hesitated. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the moment clearly. His eyes probably dipped, searching for certainty and finding none. The truth was simple, he didn't actually know. Not because I didn't try to share, but because he never asked. He never wanted to hear much after the answer wasn't the kind of pride he understood. Dad stammered. She's always been private. Jack nodded slowly. Some folks have to be. Tom rubbed his jaw. But Olivia, really? Jack's reply was barely above a whisper. If she's the one I think she is, we owe people like her more than we can ever repay. Dad scoffed weakly. She's just Olivia. Jack looked sharply at him. Frank, I'm going to ask you one thing and I want you to answer honestly. Has she ever told you she worked in intelligence? No, Dad muttered. She never said anything. Jack's voice lowered. Did you ever ask? A flush crept up Dad's neck, part embarrassment, part defensiveness. I didn't think she'd do anything like that. Jack sat back sighing. You think these people go around bragging? You think they're quiet for a reason. The men around the table looked uneasy, as if they'd stumbled into classified territory just by listening. One of them whispered, So she's not really struggling to pay rent. Jack shook his head. Those assignments don't make anyone rich. They make them dedicated. They make them disappear when they need to. They make them live modest lives so nobody looks twice. Dad's eyes widened, hands trembling slightly. So, if she is who you think... Jack finished the sentence for him. She's serving this country in ways even you and I never had to. Silence fell again, heavy, sobering, suffocating. Dad pressed a hand to his forehead. Oh, God. Another man spoke carefully. Frank, if that's true, you might have said some things tonight that'll haunt you. Dad put the beer down. I didn't know. That's the problem, Jack said gently. You didn't try to. Those words hit harder than any combat memory. They were quiet, honest, and surgically precise, like truth delivered through a scalpel, not a hammer. Dad leaned back, his face washing out as the realization bloomed in slow, painful waves. All the years of mocking, the dismissive comments, the disappointment, they all suddenly looked different through the lens of this new possibility. Jack adjusted his glasses again. Frank, you need to talk to her, not as a critic, as her father. Dad swallowed hard. Do you think she'll even listen to me? Jack shrugged. Depends on whether you talk to her, or at her. A murmur of agreement went around the table. Dad stared at the door I'd walked through, his expression hollowed by regret, uncertainty, and something else he didn't know how to name yet. Fear. Fear that he'd pushed away the one person he should have been proudest of. Outside, my footsteps had long faded into the cold night. Inside, the truth had begun to thaw something in my father that had been frozen for years. I didn't get far from the house, just down the driveway, where the cold bit at my cheeks and the quiet finally felt like air I could breathe. I stood there with my arms wrapped around myself, staring at the glow of the street lamp across the road, and wondering why I kept trying. Why every year I walked back into a place that felt less like a home and more like an exam I was destined to fail. I heard the front door open behind me. At first I thought it was my dad coming to pull me back inside with another lecture, more disappointment, or some hollow request to lighten up. But the footsteps were slower, uneven, dragging, slightly weighted by age, not anger. Olivia, a voice called gently. I turned. Jack Larson, the retired Navy SEAL. My dad always bragged about knowing, walked toward me with his hands in his jacket pockets. His breath fogged in the air. Every step looked like it cost him a small wince from old injuries he refused to medicate. Hey, I said quietly. Sorry you all had to witness that. He waved off the apology. I've witnessed a lot worse. But that wasn't right. I forced a smile. It's fine. I'm used to it. That's the part that's not fine, he murmured. He stopped a couple feet away, studying me, not the way my father did, searching for flaws, but as if he were trying to understand a puzzle he'd suddenly realized he'd been holding upside down for years. He nodded toward my chest. "Do you mind?" he asked. It took me a moment to realize what he meant. My badge. It had slipped out again, hanging plain as day in the porch light. I hesitated. "You recognize it?" Jack exhaled, not every detail, but enough. For the first time that night, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt exposed, but not unsafe. There was something in his voice, a familiar caution, the soft respect of someone who knew exactly how far not to pry. "Well," I said quietly, "I can't confirm anything classified. You know how that goes." He chuckled softly. "Oh, believe me, I do." We stood there for a moment, the cold settling around us like a thick blanket. Finally, Jack spoke again. "I want you to know. Whatever your father thinks you've done wrong, you haven't. Some of the bravest people I ever worked with lived quiet lives. They weren't celebrities. They didn't command battalions. They didn't walk around in uniforms that turned heads. They just did their job and saved a hell of a lot of people doing it." My breath hitched slightly. Compliments about my work were rare. From someone like Jack, they were practically sacred. "I'm not a hero," I whispered. Jack tilted his head. "Most real ones wouldn't claim to be." He took another step closer. "Olivia. Back when I was active, there were rumors about a logistics specialist. Someone who never missed a secure transfer, never botched a communication chain. Someone whose work was so exact that a whole unit started referring to the person as the North Star. Always reliable, always steady, always there." Heat rose behind my eyes. "Jack." "You don't have to say anything," he assured me, "but I know dedication when I see it. And that badge," he nodded toward it. "Only a handful of people ever carried those. People who worked in shadows most Americans never knew existed." A long silence stretched between us. Then I nodded once, just enough for him to understand, not enough to violate anything I'd sworn to uphold. He nodded back, slow and reverent. "You've done good work," he said. "Work men like me depended on without ever knowing the names behind the messages that saved our lives." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I wiped it away quickly. My dad wouldn't see it that way. Jack's jaw tightened. "Your father. He sees the world in a straight line. You're walking a curved path. Doesn't mean one is wrong. But it does mean he's blind to the bigger picture." I swallowed. "He thinks I'm wasting my life." "Then he's wrong," Jack said firmly. I looked back at the house. The windows glowed warmly, shadows moving inside as the men shifted in their seats. Somewhere in that light sat the man whose voice could still make me feel 16 years old and small. "I never wanted him to be proud of me because of what I do," I murmured. "I just wanted him to see me." Jack let out a breath. "You know, sometimes people miss the truth because they're too busy looking for what they expect to see." He paused, then added quietly, "He expects a soldier. He doesn't realize he already raised one." That sentence cracked something open inside me, something I didn't even know I'd been gripping tight for years. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't a disappointment, but a misunderstanding. "Do you want me to talk to him?" Jack asked. I hesitated. Would it matter? "Maybe, maybe not." He shrugged. "But men like your father, they listen differently when a fellow veteran speaks." Another long silence. Then I said softly, "Okay." Jack nodded. "Wait here." I watched him walk back toward the house, stiff-legged but determined, a man who'd carried too many burdens but somehow found room for one more. When he stepped through the front door, the noise inside immediately fell by half. Something had settled over the house, heavy, expectant, almost reverent. A minute passed, then 5. Then 10. Through the window I saw my father's silhouette, rigid shoulders, hunched head, slightly bowed, not in anger but in something closer to shock. For the first time in my life, it looked like he was truly hearing something. Not arguing with it, not fighting it, just hearing. Jack spoke with slow, deliberate gestures. Dad ran a hand over his face, then his hair, then down the back of his neck. His chest rose and fell faster than normal. He looked older. He looked scared. And suddenly I felt a pang of something unexpected, empathy. My father, the man who'd always seemed carved from stubborn stone, looked like a person realizing the world was bigger than he ever allowed himself to believe. bigger, and that the daughter he'd underestimated might have been carrying part of that world on her shoulders. As I watched him absorb the truth, I finally understood something. Revenge didn't always come as a blow. Sometimes it came as a mirror. And sometimes that reflection broke a person more deeply than anger ever could. I didn't go back inside that night. I watched that house from the end of the driveway for a few seconds, hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, breath puffing little clouds into the November air. Warm light poured out of the living room windows, but it didn't feel like my light anymore. It felt like a scene I'd just walked out of for good. Then I got in my car and drove. Thanksgiving night in our part of Michigan is quiet. The real noise is inside the homes, not on the streets. I passed a few driveways where minivans were parked at odd angles, and porch lights glowed over piles of kids' shoes. Through a couple of picture windows, I saw families bent over tables, passing dishes, leaning in and laughing. It was like flipping past channels of a show I'd never been cast in. By the time I pulled up behind my apartment building, the sky was full dark, and the wind had picked up. The security light over the stairwell flickered, then steadied as I climbed the concrete steps and let myself into my unit. Inside it was just me, the faint scent of a cheap pumpkin candle and the hum of the refrigerator. My backup plan. Thanksgiving meal was waiting in the freezer, a little frozen tray with turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing. I'd bought it a few days before, telling myself it was in case my dad burned the turkey. If I was being honest with myself, I'd known I might need it for exactly this. I peeled back the plastic, shoved it into the microwave, and listened to the buzz fill the silence. No football on TV, no clatter of dishes in the sink, no veteran buddies telling the same story for the 50th time. Just the machine, the radiator ticking in the wall, and my own thoughts, which were loud enough. The microwave beeped. I sat down at my little table and started eating. The potatoes were gluey, the turkey was dry, but I ate anyway because my body needed it, even if my heart didn't. My phone lit up halfway through. Dad. I let it ring out the first time. I wasn't ready to hear him tell me I'd overreacted, or that I'd embarrassed him in front of his friends, or that Jack was making something out of nothing. I took another bite of stuffing, chewed slowly, and stared at the screen as it went dark. A minute later it lit up again. Same name, same number, same knot in my stomach. I sighed, wiped my hands on a paper towel, and answered. Hello? There was rustling on the other end, the muffled sound of the TV, then a door closing. Footsteps moved, then stopped. Liv, he said. Just that, not sharp, not mocking, careful, like he was testing how the word felt in his mouth. I'm here, I said. You get home okay? He asked. It wasn't much, but coming from him it felt different, like he had to push the words over a hill to get them out. I did, I said. I'm fine. For a few seconds all I heard was his breathing and the faint clank of something in the background. Then he spoke again. I talked with Jack, he said. I figured, I answered. He told me some things Dad went on. Said he couldn't tell me everything, said there were rules. But he told me enough for a hard-headed idiot to understand he's been wrong, real wrong. The word wrong coming from my father felt almost unreal. About what I asked. He blew out a breath. About you, about that badge, about the way I've been running my mouth for years. I stayed quiet. For once in my life I didn't rush to fill the silence for him. He recognized your badge, Dad said softly. Said he hasn't seen one like it since he was still getting sent to places he doesn't talk about. Said it belongs to people who do work most of us never know about. People who don't get their names on plaques. I stared at the little plastic fork in my hand. Jack remembers a lot, I said. He's also generous. He's not generous, Dad said with a weak little laugh. He's blunt, always has been. Tonight he looked me right in the eye and said, You don't have a clue what your daughter really does, do you? I could almost see that scene so clearly it felt like I'd been there. What did you say? I asked. I said you worked at Walmart, he replied, and he just stared at me for a second like he was trying to decide if I was stupid or blind. The tiniest smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. He told me Dad continued about briefings he'd sat in on, about civilians who made sure the right intel landed in the right place at the right time, folks who never held a rifle on a battlefield but still kept men like him alive. Said one of those people had your name. My throat tightened. He's remembering pieces. Nothing's supposed to be about one person. Doesn't matter, Dad said. What matters is I've been talking down to somebody who's been carrying more weight than I ever gave her credit for, and I needed to call and say I'm sorry." He didn't dress it up, he didn't tack a joke onto the end, he just let the words sit there solid and plain. "For tonight," I asked quietly, "or for the last 20 years? He hesitated. "Both," he said. "For tonight, definitely. For all the other times I thought mocking you might toughen you up. For not asking what you actually did with your time. For assuming that if I didn't recognize the shape of your life, it meant it wasn't worth much." I felt my eyes sting. I tilted my head back and stared at the ceiling until the tears settled. "You hurt me," I said. It felt strange to say it out loud, like admitting a secret everybody already knew. "I know," he answered. "I saw your face tonight when I ran my mouth. I've seen that face before. I told myself you were being sensitive. Jack told me I've been a coward. I think he's right." That admission landed almost harder than the apology. "You always said you wanted me strong," I murmured. "I did," he said. "Problem is I only knew one kind of strong. Yelling, pushing, never backing down. I looked at you and thought you were weak because you didn't look like that. Meanwhile, you were out there." He trailed off, then caught himself. "You were out there doing work I can't even ask you about." "That's the job," I said simply. "And I made fun of you over a name tag," he said, "in front of men who, if they knew the whole truth, would probably stand up when you walked into a room." I didn't agree, I didn't argue, I just let him sit with the image. "It's going to take time," I said at last. "I can't flip a switch and forget everything you've said, not just tonight." "I don't want you to forget," he replied. I hope you'll let me try to do better while we're both still here." There was fear in his voice. Real fear, not of enemies or bills or bad knees, fear of losing something he'd taken for granted. "I don't know what better looks like yet," I admitted. "Me neither," he said. "Maybe it starts with me keeping my mouth shut when I want to make a joke at your expense. Maybe it's me asking, 'How was your week?' and actually listening to the answer. Maybe it's you sitting at my table next Thanksgiving and not having one foot halfway out the door." A small watery laugh slipped out of me. "That last one's ambitious." "Yeah," he said, "but a man's gotta have goals." We both went quiet for a moment. The radiator hissed. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's TV audience laughed too loudly at something canned. "Will you still answer when I call?" he asked finally. I thought about that younger version of me who would have said, "Of course, Dad, no matter what." I thought about the woman I'd become, who'd sat at too many tables swallowing her own hurt to keep the peace. Then I thought about the old soldier standing in his hallway phone pressed to his ear, finally seeing his daughter in a new light and not liking what it said about him. "Yes," I said slowly, "I'll answer." He let out a breath I could hear all the way through the line. "Okay, that's more than I deserve. Thank you." We talked a few minutes more about small things, the turkey, the pie, nobody cut the lions, losing again like they were obligated by law. It was awkward and simple and strangely gentle. After we hung up, I set my phone down beside my badge on the table. I picked up the badge and turned it over in my hand, feeling the familiar weight of it. For years I'd carried it as part of my duty, part of my cover, part of a life my father never understood. That night it felt like something else, too. For the first time it felt like proof, not just of what I did, but of who I was, whether my father ever fully caught up to that or not. And somewhere across town I knew he was standing in his own quiet house, looking at the empty chair where I'd been sitting, and finally realizing that the smallest person at his table might have been carrying the biggest load. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, I found myself standing in my tiny kitchen staring at the window above the sink, as weak winter sunlight filtered through the blinds. The world felt quieter than usual, like it was waiting for something. My phone lay on the counter beside a half-finished cup of coffee. I'd been expecting another call from Dad, but none came that morning. Instead, around noon, there was a knock at my door. 3 gentle taps, hesitant. Not the confident rhythm of a delivery driver, or the impatient pounding of someone trying to sell me energy-efficient windows. This knock belonged to someone who wasn't sure they should be knocking at all. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Dad stood there with both hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his shoulders hunched against the cold, his breath fogging in the air. He looked older than he did 2 days ago, and quieter. His eyes, usually sharp with opinions, seemed unsure of where to rest. "Hey, Liv," he said softly. "Dad," I replied. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then I stepped aside. "You want to come in?" He nodded and walked in cautiously, as if he were entering someone else's home, someone he didn't want to offend. He glanced around, taking in my small living room, the second-hand couch, the framed photos from early years, before everything got complicated. "I haven't been here in a while," he murmured. "You haven't," I said. He swallowed. "Yeah." I motioned toward the table. "Sit if you want." He did, lowering himself into the chair like it was made of glass. He rubbed his hands together, then placed them flat on the table, palms down as if anchoring himself. "I didn't know if you'd open the door," he said. "I wasn't sure if I would either," I admitted. Dad nodded. "Fair." Silence stretched between us, not hostile but fragile, like a bridge made of paper that both of us were afraid to step on. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke. "Olivia, I came because... Look, I know I said sorry on the phone, but some things you need to say in person." I sat across from him, hands in my lap. I'm listening. He took a deep breath, the kind that shakes a little on the way out. "I've been thinking about you, about the way I've talked to you over the years. I thought I was teaching you to be tough. Turns out I was just pushing you away." My throat tightened, but I didn't say anything. He went on. "I wanted you to live a life that made sense to me. Steady job, benefits, maybe work your way up in management somewhere. Something simple. Something I could explain to people." He shook his head. "But that wasn't fair. I didn't even bother trying to understand your life before judging it." I stared at him. He'd never said anything like that, not once. "I didn't know what you really did," he continued. "And yeah, maybe some of that's on you for keeping quiet, but most of it's on me. I didn't ask. I didn't listen." His voice grew thick. "I just assumed, and I assumed wrong." "It wasn't easy to talk about," I said carefully. "Not just because of the rules. Because, well, every time I tried telling you something real, I felt like you were waiting to find the flaw in it." Dad looked down ashamed. "You're right." And after a while I added quietly, "I stopped trying." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that truth. I get it now." We sat there, letting the honesty settle between us. Finally, Dad looked up. "I don't know what all of your job involves. And I don't need to. But Jack made it clear you've carried responsibilities. Heavy ones. The kind that would have scared the hell out of me when I was your age. And I mocked you for not climbing some invisible ladder I built in my head." I felt tears prick behind my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Dad, I never needed you to be proud because of what I do. I just needed you to be proud of who I am." He closed his eyes for a moment, pained. When he opened them, there was something raw in them, vulnerability I'd rarely seen. "I am proud of you, Liv," he said quietly. "I've been too stupid to see it, but I am. Proud of the person you became. Proud of the backbone you have. Proud of the heart you didn't let me beat out of you." He forced a small chuckle. "Even proud that you can apparently keep secrets better than the CIA." A weak laugh escaped me. "Dad." "I mean it," he said. "And I don't want to lose you. I don't want Thanksgiving to end up being the last memory I have of you sitting at my table." That hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him, really looked at him. The way his hands trembled slightly, the lines on his face etched by more regrets than years, the way his shoulders sagged, not from physical exhaustion, but from carrying shame he didn't know how to set down. "I don't want that either," I said softly. Relief washed over his features, subtle, hesitant, but real. "I want us to try again," he said. "Not pretend nothing happened, just try." I nodded. "We can try." Dad let out a breath that sounded like a small prayer. "Thank you." He looked around the room again, slower this time, taking it in with a gentler eye. "You know, this place is cozy, warmer than I expected." "It's small," I said. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "It feels like you." "Is that a good thing?" I asked. He smiled. "Yes, it is." For the first time in a long time, sitting across from him didn't make me feel like a disappointment waiting to be discovered. It felt possible. Like we were two people standing at the edge of something old and broken, trying to decide whether it was worth rebuilding. "Dad?" I asked. "Yeah." Do you want some coffee? I gestured toward the pot. He lifted his eyebrows. You making it the way your mom used to, real strong. Stronger, I said. Then yes, he replied with a grin, small, tentative, but unmistakably my father's. I stood and poured 2 mugs. When I set his down, his fingers brushed mine not by accident, but as a quiet thank you. We sat there for another hour talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. We didn't fix decades of misunderstandings in a single afternoon. But we began something real. A bridge made not of paper this time, but of honesty, of choices, of effort. And maybe even after everything, hope. 1 year later, I stood in the same driveway with a pumpkin pie in my hands and a very different feeling in my chest. The November air still cut through my coat. The same maple tree across the street stood bare, but the knot in my stomach was gone. Last year, I'd left this house feeling small and invisible. This year, I was walking toward the front door because for the first time in a long time, my father had asked me to come, and I believed he meant it. I knocked. The door opened almost at once. Dad stood there in an apron dusted with flour, his hair sticking up where he'd pushed his fingers through it. Hey, Liv, he said. Hey, Dad. We looked at each other for a heartbeat. No sigh, no eye roll at my clothes, no quick joke at my expense. Just my father looking a little older and somehow a little softer. Come on in, he added. You're right on time. Inside, the TV was off. The radio in the kitchen played old Motown low enough that you could hear people talk. A couple of his veteran buddies sat in the living room, but when they saw me, they didn't smirk the way they had last year. They nodded, offered small smiles, shifted their knees so I could pass. Jack sat in Dad's recliner cane, leaning against his leg. He gave me a small, knowing nod. Olivia, he said, glad you made it. Me too, I answered, and this time it was true. The table in the dining room looked almost fancy compared to years past. Real glasses, cloth napkins. The silverware didn't match, but it was polished. At each plate, Dad had placed a folded card with someone's name written in his careful, shaky handwriting. At my place near the head of the table, the card read, Olivia reserved for my hero. My throat tightened. You did this? I asked. Dad followed my eyes and shifted awkwardly. Figured it was about time, he said. You've been carrying more than I ever gave you credit for. Thought your chair ought to reflect that. You didn't have to, I said. I know, he replied quietly. That's why I wanted to. We gathered around the table. For the first time in my life, Dad volunteered to say grace. Lord, he began, voice rough, thank you for this food, this roof, and the folks sitting under it. Thank you for old friends who stick around, and thank you for second chances, especially with family. He paused, swallowed. And thank you, he added, for my daughter, Olivia, for the work she's done that I didn't understand, and for the patience she showed a stubborn old man who took too long to see straight. Amen, Jack said softly. Amen, I whispered. As bowls and platters made their way around the table, I realized what felt so different. The jokes at my expense were gone. No one asked how long I planned to stay at Walmart. No one repeated the line about me barely paying rent. Instead, they asked if my car was still running, if my apartment stayed warm, how my sleep had been. I answered in broad strokes. I still couldn't talk about most of what I did, but the difference was no one pushed. For once, my quiet didn't feel like something to be corrected. It felt like something they were willing to respect. Halfway through the meal, Tom lifted his glass. To the quiet ones, he said. The folks who keep things running so the loud ones like us can sit around and tell stories. Glasses lifted. Dad picked up his water. Especially this one, he said, nodding toward me. I spent too many years talking about what she wasn't. I'm planning to spend whatever time I've got left paying attention to what she is. My cheeks warmed, but it wasn't with shame. It was with something I hadn't felt at this table since I was a kid, belonging. Later, after the plates were stacked in the sink and the men had wandered off to argue about football in the living room, Dad and I stayed at the table. The candle between us had burned down to a puddle of wax. He picked up my place card, turned it over in his fingers, and smiled a little. Too much, he asked. I shook my head. No, it was exactly what it needed to be. He nodded slowly. I meant what I said, Liv. I can't take back all the years I tried to measure you with my yardstick. I thought respect only came with rank or a promotion or a title people recognized. I was wrong. And I'm sorry it took a Navy SEAL and a little piece of plastic on your lanyard to knock that into my skull." I let out a small laugh. Better late than never. His eyes glistened. "If you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days proving I finally get it." I reached across and put my hand over his. "We can keep working on it," I said. "One Thanksgiving at a time." His fingers tightened around mine. "I'll take that deal." We sat there in a quiet that felt peaceful instead of tense. No one was trying to win. No one was bracing for the next remark. We were just two flawed people choosing finally to stay at the table and keep talking. Later, standing back in the driveway with the night settling in around me and the windows glowing behind me, I thought about how many people never get a moment like that. Cashiers, janitors, truck drivers, caregivers, clerks, nurses, mechanics, and quiet analysts with strange little badges, people holding up pieces of the world while still feeling like they've never done enough. I thought about veterans who come home and don't know who they are without a uniform. About daughters and sons who leave holidays early with a knot in their chest. About parents who only realize years later that they were judging their children with a broken standard. If you hear any part of your own life in mine, I hope you take this with you. Your worth was never waiting on somebody else finally being proud of you. Maybe you're the one who needs to pick up the phone and say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I want to try again." Maybe you're the one staring at a familiar number on your screen trying to decide if you can risk opening the door one more time. Or maybe you're simply the person who shows up every day, does the unglamorous work, and wonders if any of it really matters. It does. You don't need a medal or a title to live a life that deserves respect. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep acting with integrity when nobody's watching, and leave a small space in your heart for the possibility that people can grow even if they're late. If this story stirred something in you, I'd invite you to share it with someone who might need that reminder today. And if you'd like to hear more stories about ordinary people, quiet courage, and second chances, I hope you'll stick around, follow or subscribe, whatever the button says where you're listening. Because a lot of the biggest victories don't happen on battlefields or in boardrooms. Sometimes they happen at a kitchen table on a cold November evening, when a father finally looks across at his daughter and for the first time truly sees her. He 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 sees her.